the context for this is, how do we, implement and uplift the enterprise architecture capability within an organization, and providing a framework for looking at that capability and identifying areas of where we're performing well and where we have some opportunities to improve. But for those of you that, are a part of the architecture profession, will likely understand that, just because we can get better at, enterprise architecture doesn't mean it's necessarily clear how we're going to achieve that new level of performance, how we're going to secure funding for that, how we're going to create a call for action. And so what we found through practice is that, the leadership of the enterprise architecture capability, needs to somehow distill what the value proposition of enterprise architecture is to the enterprise. And that's based on, like with a lot of professions, the stakeholders really don't care about the gory implementation details of architecture, which of course is of great concern to us in the profession. What they do care about, however, are the outcomes of enterprise architecture. So, somehow we need to be able to have a way to describe the things that are coming down the pipeline as it relates to strategic initiatives and in both business and IT. So the notion is, if we have that context, that can provide the ability for, the architecture team to go to business and IT leadership and say, hey, we need more resources, we need more funding because of the things that you're asking us to do. We also need to be able to think about, making sure that enterprise architecture is relevant and plugged into the rest of the organization. So, one of the common best practices that we're seeing in enterprise architecture, particularly around strategic planning and business architecture, is the idea of being able to, support and integrate with what we call value chains. And we'll talk just a little bit about that and the underlying notion of what capabilities are. But for example, in a property and casualty insurance company, for example, there may be a high-level value chain that basically distills what the organization does, such as shop, buy, service, and claim. Or, as we'll see in a little bit, if we're talking about the business of IT, we may have a value chain that's described by plan, build, and run. So kind of, a really high level of abstraction of, at the end of the day, what does this part of the business do? And like we talked about earlier, improving enterprise architecture capability just because you have, opportunities for improvement is really challenging if there isn't a call to action. And many of you may know, because, the E in enterprise architecture, enterprise, it really requires some cross-organization executive support to really pull it off successfully. And at the end of the day, people really don't care about it until they really understand what's in it for me. Here we see, the first glimpses of what we're proposing as the architecture value chain at the top of this slide. Again, that's fundamentally what we're trying to do as architects. And this is really a broad view of architecture, because one of our intentions here is to try to see if we can use this value chain as a basis for unifying the architecture profession. So not solely just enterprise architecture, but program-level architecture, project-level architecture, infrastructure architecture, across the different domains that, for example, TOGAF, the Open Group Architecture Framework, describes as business architecture, application data, and technology architecture. And so, when we took a step back and really started to think about, what are the things that we do as architects, irrespective of the level of abstraction that we're at or the particular domain that we might play in. And so we have characterized it as these four basic steps that ultimately we're initially trying to help the enterprise understand what's going on within the enterprise. And that could be both helping to understand, as TOGAF calls it, the baseline or current state architecture. So, what are all the applications, the relationships to the supporting technologies, the services they expose, how that intersects with the business architecture, but as well as perhaps trying to understand a little bit about, well, where are we going? Why are we wanting to change the current state and get to some higher level of performance? And that really, again, is the whole idea behind the understand part. And then once we have some understanding, then we're going to take that data and use it as the basis for doing analysis, which is the second part of the architecture value chain. And that should, again, provide us with different ways of looking at the data that we've collected and lead us to the third part of the value chain, which is trying to make decisions about, okay, so if we're in this situation and we're trying to achieve these types of outcomes, what are the things that we're going to have to do to actually realize that? And then after we've actually put together a plan based on the decisions that we've made, we actually now need to respond and actually deliver something useful to the enterprise. But, the idea behind what this slide is getting to is to really kind of map out, as it relates to, in this case, how does the architecture value chain intersect and relate to the IT value chain. So we see that on the left-hand side. And this is an abstraction of what many of you may use within your organizations, loosely based on COBIT, the control objectives for IT. That talks about fundamentally IT is about these three sets of activities. We're trying to do planning about where we want to make our investments. Once we make some of those, decisions about where we're going to do project work, we then actually build some sort of solution. And then once that solution's been built, we then need to deploy it and operate it. So that's kind of the idea of plan, build, run, which is loosely correlated to, multiple levels of abstraction within the enterprise that we're calling, things that happen across the entire enterprise at the top. Again, program level stuff, project level stuff, and operational level stuff. And what this is really trying to describe is that these are the business and IT initiatives that might be going on within a particular organization. The color coding is representing things that want to get done, for example, this year in 2015, where the yellow ones or gold ones are things that we're talking about trying to achieve next year. So just a little bit of a kind of a planning roadmap. But when we're talking, for example, about wanting to try to simplify the IT landscape as it relates to either reducing complexity, removing redundancy, so on and so forth. The organization that we've been working with on this, Nationwide Insurance, talked about, well, we need to do some simplification activities. We really can't bite that all off in one big chunk, so we're going to slice that up into two initiatives that are related to one another, the first one being simplification version 1.0. And that's going to really help, that's going to require us to have a good architecture capability in the understand and analyze part of the value chain. And then once that's in shape, then we'll be in a good position to continue to uplift architecture as it relates to the second half of the value chain for simplification version 2.0, which is going to talk about, again, how are we going to make investments in the decide and respond part of the value chain. Other types of initiatives here is, organizations are often interested in being able to set themselves up to be compared to their peers within industry for doing benchmarking. We want to be able to do business unit level planning. And so those are things, again, that are happening at the enterprise level. And then, go a little further down the stack, other opportunities for improvement around planning, program level architecture, and then actually, delivering that once the programs have been defined and initiated. A very common use case for enterprise architecture at the solution delivery project level is project impact assessment. And this is a big part of, how we engage organizations to help them, again, sustain and operate this capability through some sort of tooling using a repository-driven